Well, welcome everyone to the session. I hope everyone's having a great time today, and let's get started, right? So first, a couple of housekeeping slides from the organizers of DDD, developer. Sadly, again this year virtual, as we all happen to know, but hoping to get there for the physical iteration or hybrid one any year now. A couple of housekeeping, as I mentioned, do be mindful of everyone else. Do be inclusive if you witness or if you yourself are not feeling welcome, are not feeling respected, then do reach out to the organizers. Do check out the code of conduct. It's available in the Discord and also behind this neat little bit.ly link over here as well. Regarding organizational side, so basically this year, as there are no physical costs for the event, actually the organizer of DDD asked actually the sponsors and everyone else who's interested to actually donate to the National Museum of Computing in Bletchley Park. That actually does a lot of good work to keeping the history of our industry actually going on. And actually some of the sponsors like Sage, Landmark, Black Marble have actually already donated to this as well. And yeah, basically you are able to pitch in yourself behind that sponsorship link. You are actually also able to join in not just in Discord, but we are also active in Twitter behind DDD 2021 and at Developer Day. Feel free to ask any type of questions in the Discord. We should be able to pick those up here throughout the session here. And if not, I'm going to take a quick recap at the end and also have a little bit of chat-based Q&A. If anyone wants to ask later your questions, feel free to also drop them later, or if you're watching this on a little bit of a time shift over on some of the recordings as well. So with that, let's get started. So yeah, the title of this session is Cloud Security Predictions for the Post-Pandemic World, and I did write this session, as you might have known. I did write this session title maybe half a year ago or so, thinking that this would have actually been a post-pandemic situation to talk about, but things are what they are, but they are still cloud security predictions for the next, let's say, 2 or 3 years going forward. These are all based on kind of real life experiences from implementing different cloud security programs in pretty much the largest enterprises in the whole world. And I've also been talking through some of those examples that we all know from the public, from the news basically as well. But who am I here to talk to you about these things? Again, my name is Karl Ots. I'm a cloud and security leader from Finland, actually currently based in Switzerland. I'm the head of cloud security at EPAM Systems, which is a pretty large global engineering company based in the US. I wear many different hats as a community leader. I'm also a conference organizer myself. I'm one of the puppet masters behind Global Azure, and I have done tons of acronyms associated with myself, such as the CISSP and RD programs. And quite recently, I'm also the author of Azure Security Handbook. If written format is your thing, go check it out. I rant a little bit more about these same topics in a little bit more structured fashion, and that should help you also if you are not a cloud person, but do want to kind of, if you're coming from the security side of things and want to compare and contrast towards this cloud world as well. So this is basically the plan for the session. Staying true to this forecasting analogy, we'll start by looking at the cybersecurity climate and how it's changed with the pandemic. And then we'll look at how the changing business priorities affect the whole cloud security. And finally, we'll look at how does all of this apply to developers. And after each of the sections, I'll dust off my crystal ball and proclaim a couple of predictions, and then it'll be interesting to see how we'll be able to keep up with those. So let's get started. So basically, the cybersecurity climate nowadays is that if you're looking at the headlines, everyone is a target. Pretty much anyone can just buy a DDoS attack or data breach as a service. It's very cheap. It's maybe a couple of dozen, maybe 100 quid tops per attack. It's no longer just nation states. It's actual criminal organizations who are ramping up very fast in terms of their attacks. And as an industry, of course, we need to get our act together to actually match the speed of these attackers. But if you are an end user, if you're an enterprise, or if you're a smaller business, you might have already struggled with stuff like Cyber Essentials. It's all quite overwhelming, and often I find a lot of especially smaller orgs are thinking that no, these things won't affect us. That's no longer the case as we look at this going further. There's more and more proven business incentive from the cyber criminals to attack anyone, not just for the value of your data itself or the confidentiality of specifically what you are doing. It's no longer just specific to some single industries. And at the same time, the attack surface is also broadening because of stuff like changes to the network perimeter, plethora of new IoT devices, remote working, all of these things are being added there. And very specifically, when we are adding cloud here to the mix, we actually get to see that it's not just something that it's a server that's sitting in our on-premises and maybe even just under this desk of the CFO, and that will be it. Everything's actually connected now, and that means that also the attackers can connect to all of our points of entry of the attack surfaces. And as we know, sometimes these changes to all of these attack surfaces, all of these environments can be extremely fast. Like when we took in remote working capabilities in the first 5 weeks of March 2020. And all of this gets us into basically the notion that we really need some sort of a refresher in the cloud version of this old Nordisk version of the trustworthy computing. We really need trustworthy cloud computing, and we need to agree on what to do, how to do it, and we need to basically get doing it. We need to keep up with this momentum. Hopefully, we have the budget, at least we have the attention now. So the pandemic gave us some sort of momentum to actually implement cloud computing, sometimes a little bit too fast, so we might actually have a little bit more technical depth and especially security depth. But at least right now we should have the eyes and ears of the money or the purse holders, because of these vast amounts of data breaches and other cybersecurity related incidents in the past year and a half. So let's not waste this opportunity. Let's hope that this is not too little, too late. And yeah, let's get to the from the cloud perspective. We should go towards the world where cloud is not an attack vector to your own premises, but cloud is secure enough or more secure than your own premises, and you should start considering your own premises actually being an attack vector to your cloud world. So completely different way of thinking it. So your cloud security will be in a good place when you know that your own premises are doing and you have the data to prove it, that your own premises are doing worse from the security perspective than your cloud world is. Well, time for a first grand prediction then. I actually do believe that we haven't yet seen the bulk of the impact or volume even of cloud-based attacks and cloud-based cyber incidents. And a key reason for those is actually cloud misconfigurations. Actually, they are already the top reason for data breaches. If you look at available data, such as from Verizon, there's a data breach report that they publish every year. The latest available from 2020 actually lists not any sort of 0 days, not any sort of nation state attacks or anything. It's actually just pure, simple misconfigurations of cloud services that are the top reason for any of these publicly known data breaches, ransomware attacks, or all of these incidents. And even these more traditional security side organizations like OWASP, they agree that this is really a growing threat. In the new OWASP top 10 list of threats, top 10 list, they actually moved security misconfigurations a little bit up again. So I believe we are somewhere around the middle. We are somewhere around top 10. We are roughly in number 5 in overall any sort of application security top 10 risks that you can have. So that's quite a big thing compared to these should be services that should quite often be running as out of the box as possible. And sometimes it's not even enough to do our part of that puzzle or the parts that's our responsibility correctly. Sometimes we really do need to react quickly in the world of cloud as well. It's not patching as such, but a lot of the same type of responsibilities affect us. So if you look maybe the past 6 months or so, we had quite a big breaches. We had quite a big announcements of vulnerabilities exposed, both with Chaos DB, where we actually had a majority of Cosmos DB accounts actually potentially exposed to elevation of privilege attacks, as well as having the same happen then with this Linux OMS monitoring agent on Azure Virtual Machine environments as well, the Omigod attacks or exposures to be more precise. Luckily, if you did your work correctly, if you knew what you were doing, you weren't that affected with either of them. With Chaos DB, if you used some of the very latest services, very specific notebook types, and you did not have any of your network controls in place, you could be vulnerable to attacks. At the same actually true with Omigod as well, that only in the case of if you actually had exposed your virtual machines to the public internet, then you will be actually this will be usable attack against you straight away. Of course, someone actually getting into your environment through other means is still a question, but hopefully we are, even last year at the same conference, I was talking about my one single thing to fix was always about fix your public endpoints. Do not expose your ports, management ports, or anything from your VMs really directly from your cloud to the public internet. And we actually have some tools that can help mitigate this. So policy as code tools and cloud security posture management tools can actually help us actually get the awareness of what we are doing here, how we are doing, what is our posture in the cloud, but also helping to mitigate those things at scale. If you see a configuration like Chaos DB or Omigod that we do need to find out where are we affected, if at all, these are the tools that you can use. Native tools like Azure Security Center, you can run your custom query language queries against those. You'll know what your patch levels are, you'll know what is installed, what agents are there, and the same way across the clouds as well. You can use tools like Cloud Custodian, Cloud Conformity, or vendor tools like Dome9 and these others. So we need also cloud native and automated compliance as code tools to go into the runtime even there as well and figure out, in the case of containers, for example, what are we actually operating in and what are we running there. And to look at a little bit differently in under this responsibility questions, or to reiterate a little bit differently about my point of, you need to understand the responsibility of any of these exposures or any of these breaches or any of these, not your own misconfigurations, but misconfigurations of the cloud vendors. What I mean is that for each cloud service you are about to use, you should really dissect that from the point of view of the responsibility and understand what is actually that you can affect, first of all, and what is something that you can actually, what is something that is your responsibility to fix, what is something that you actually need to worry about with these cloud services. So you can basically think of this exercise as a kind of a miniature threat modeling exercise that you can look at before you start using a specific cloud service. And here I have an example of managed Kubernetes services, kind of tying into what Annie just was talking about before me. So services like in Amazon EKS, Azure AKS, or Google GKE, these are services that they are partially managed by cloud vendors. They are managed Kubernetes, but we really need to understand a little bit more deeper what is actually managed there, because they are not platform as a service, and they are not infrastructure as a service either. So the cloud solution providers, or these hyperscalers, they are responsible for creating, configuring, operating all of these parts of your Kubernetes control plane. So the Kubernetes control plane, I think Annie was talking about this a little bit, but basically these include stuff like API servers, the etcd, kubedns, and other systems that are inside this kind of Kubernetes system namespace. But that is only a part of your cluster. So you are still responsible of quite significant parts of your Kubernetes service, such as the nodes themselves that actually are running these parts of containers. You're responsible of access control. You are responsible of the actual data that you put in there, and of course you are responsible of patching these nodes from the vulnerability perspective, and any sort of networking operations. If you think of exposing your applications outside of the cluster, then there's kind of network security, kind of web application firewall questions, egress questions. You can have a look at those service meshes or some others. But even within the cluster, you are responsible of setting actually these in-cluster network controls in place, so that if you have multiple applications running in your cluster, and that's what Kubernetes is meant for, not just running a single application, then you are responsible of creating these limitations of how, or if ever, these are able to talk to each other. So all in all, cloud misconfigurations, both yours and the cloud vendors, they will be creating havoc, causing havoc more and more in the future. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the business side of things here as well. So I touched upon this a little bit already, but basically the public cloud vendors proved really themselves in terms of capacity and availability throughout the pandemic. And this is actually a quote from Gartner, from no other. The pandemic validated the cloud's value proposition. When it was needed most, it proved elasticity, it proved geo-redundancy, it proved geo-distribution, so that we were able to jump into this world of cloud computing, even for those quote-unquote laggards of industry, as Gartner likes to label everyone being a little bit more cautious in adopting new technologies. And really this meant that the cloud computing model is now ready to mature from these experiments of these kind of early adapters into becoming kind of a mainstream computing platform, or even the only computing platform in some cases for established enterprises. So it's no longer the question of, will we go to the cloud? It's no question of, well, we are here in the cloud. We happen to be here now. How do we secure all of this? Where do we even get started? And basically, this is because of this current situation that we are in. So you might have seen this before, but basically almost immediately on the first 10-15 weeks of March 2020, this started circulating in at least my networks. So basically, we all saw this joke about the C-suite who led the most successful digital transformation program, of course, being the COVID-19, not the CTO, not CIO, etc. But the truth is that the CIOs did actually quite well. A lot of organizations were able to introduce, for example, split tunneling if they were still using their kind of traditional network perimeter-based approach for their video conferencing, voice conferencing environments. This meant that, of course, the users who were now stuck at home, the end users were able to actually use the network of the actual internet network, not just go VPN into their enterprise environment and then back out again. And a lot of other changes happened because of this, and a lot of sleepless nights, I'm sure. But so the CIOs did quite well, but actually the CISOs, I'm actually more worried about, because there were a lot of compromises, and I'm sure the CISOs will have a nightmare or series of nightmares for a while because of this. And to top even this off, after this initial shock, it's then a question of talent attrition. It's no longer nice to have the ability to offer these remote work possibilities. It's even a must-have. Basically, there's now a global talent war going on, bidding war of technology talent, of security talent, of cloud talent. We know all about these, and it's basically the job seekers market to ask and even require remote working options. And that means that the organizations that were thinking that, okay, we'll do this for a while, we'll do this remote work thing, but then we'll go back in again, they will be in a significant well, at least they have to have a little bit of retrospection to discuss or look in the mirror, see what else they can do to actually attract that sort of talent in there. And basically, with all of this going on, remote work, switch to remote work, a lot of technical debt that we need to catch up on, a lot of best of breed services that we need to offer so that we can actually stay competitive from the talent perspective. All of this going on, we still need to actually perform while we transform, as the CFOs like to mention. So there is this reality check that even though this was the biggest jump or migration of infrastructure or networks or applications for ages, and we know that there is technical debt, there are some loopholes, or there are some corners that were cut short that we need to actually go back and fix in. There is still this pressure of budgeting. There is no magical new budget coming in, and I've actually seen a lot of industries at first scale back a lot of new application development, and that meant again creating new technical debt as we grew, or incurring more technical debt as we didn't do anything. At worst, if you were using consultants, you won't be able to get back those same people. If you cut everything short in a short amount of time, you will even run the least risk of not doing proper knowledge transfer and all of that. But at the same time, there are new opportunities now that digital is kind of a keyword and buzzword again, and we are bringing now digital, quote unquote digital, into areas where it really lagged behind in terms of industries such as healthcare or geographies as well. But now there will be, I would argue, a more strict focus also on the cost side of things. But it's not all that bad. So cue the fanfare. Time for another type of prediction here. So something that is also happening from the technology maturity perspective, we've seen beyond the horizon, we are seeing this confidential compute capabilities coming in, and also in terms of capacity actually available for mainstream usage as well. So what business opportunities does this confidential compute unlock? So this is basically opening up things like sharing healthcare data between competitors or healthcare data between different providers, such as insurance and your medical provider, securely in a mathematically proven, not kind of lawyer proven way. Confidential compute allows you to run compute on encrypted data sets. So basically you can still focus, you can build your algorithm, you can build your analytics, your code without actually having access to the actual data in. You can train your models on the real data, but you won't have access to it yourself. And believe it or not, I drew this myself to illustrate a little bit what we mean by this. So basically, just to put this very simple and to cut a little bit of corners here, confidential compute is basically adding a third layer of encryption. So first, we had, of course, encryption in transit when we move data over networks. We started securing those with SSL. Now there's TLS. We have different cyber suites. We have TLS 1.3 coming in as well. Then we had, of course, securing data at rest. We have different asymmetric encryptions that we can use to secure data at rest when they are not in use. But we still were missing this last part of when we actually loaded this data into memory, then we decrypted them. So while the application is running and it's in the compute is happening, that's when the data is vulnerable. So it is exposed to attacks as someone actually taking a memory dump of everything. It is exposed to someone getting access to the physical servers, etc. So confidential compute is basically just based on the chip providers like Intel, NGX, AMD has a similar version. It's a bunch of hardware that is getting added to our server level server level compute. And in addition to that, it's also new cloud era or cloud vendor provided services that is giving us possibility to run these services that we are used to on top of this confidential compute hardware. Here's an example of a confidential compute use case. So basically, I mentioned an example in healthcare. So here's one example. This is actually from Microsoft Reference Architecture Central. I can share the link here later, but this is basically a confidential compute on healthcare platform example scenario. In here, they are actually using securely collaborating between a hospital who actually is the owner of the data or is the processor of the data here, and a third-party diagnostic provider who's running some additional analytics on top of this data provided by the hospital in here. So what we are having here is basically we have Azure Kubernetes service hosted confidential computing nodes. So the same AKS that we are used to, but now running on top of this confidential compute enabled hardware. We have specific software that we need to run on top of this. There's specific SDKs that we need to use, of course, to run our software there. And then we have Azure Attestation Service, which basically establishes this trust between these two different providers. That is acting there as a shared method of trust. And in this architecture, we basically isolate the sensitive data of the hospital patients and sharing the specified we are sharing a subset of that data to be processed in the cloud. And we are adding additional processing power from this diagnostic provider, who is a complete different entity that is able to run on their AKS confidential compute enabled clusters, their own models against the same data set coming from the hospital, and without actually having access, without actually decrypting it into their own use. So basically, the current offering is that on the cloud side of things, we have Microsoft, AWS, and these offering these secure runtimes based on Intel and AMD chipsets on top of infrastructure as a service. A little bit on top of coming now on top of containers as a service, as we saw with AKS here, and in the future we see more and more of these cloud services like Azure SQL going to use confidential compute enabled trusted enclaves. And now this will be finally the technical enabler or this technology that will actually finally unlock a lot of these data related opportunities or hopes or fears that we have been talking about with this big data for quite a bit of time now. All right. And with that, let's talk about the third or final part of this, staying true to the conference, of course. Let's talk about developers. So let's talk about how the cloud security landscape has changed and how does that affect the lives of developers, or will affect. So basically, devs are asked to work on top of all of these hurdles that we talk about on the business side. Devs are asked to work on all of this fancy AI and ML stuff, while there is still a lot of technical depth from the organizational maturity. There might not be data governance, there might not even be data classification at all, or they might simply lack proper integrations. So maybe the expectation on the business side and the reality on the development and data side, they are not meeting each other. A lot of the time of these data scientists or data engineers are spent on actually scraping, cleaning the data. So it's more about being data janitors rather than being data engineers as such. And that has its effects also in the available time for actually creating results, obviously. But if you are spending that much time cleaning the data, a non-functional requirement from my perspective, how much time do you think you are getting in your project to then focus on other non-functional requirements, quote unquote non-functional, such as security? Not that many. Even though we are talking about this ML ops, meaning that we are operationalizing all of this, the cleaning part will be more formalized. We will be using CI/CD to run all of these models to be trained, or actually operationalizing those models. It's still a long way from a secure DevSecOps type of world that we are used to when developing new software. Even infrastructure as code scanning is much better in terms of maturity right now, as we are in the MLOps world of things. So there's definitely a lot of risk involved when we are dealing with more and more important data before we get to the confidential, and even if we get to the confidential compute world, the MLOps side of things will be a significant factor of consulting job for consultants as myself, and a factor of headache for people who need to secure these environments. Well, next topic there is definitely low code. So at the same time as we are getting asked to do all of this fancy AI and ML stuff, we are asked to perform while we transform and we'll go to the cloud. All of this at the same time, the developers are being challenged with the rise of this no and low code, where basically citizen developers are putting more and more time pressure on the other part of the puzzle of how much does it cost from time perspective to create a new line of business application. So there might be the perception that a lot of these simple or simple-esque crude type of development, so applications, line of business applications that are basically just creating, reading, updating, or deleting data from a data set, are going to be replaced by low code. And that can be a good thing, as long as we don't forget about these non-functional requirements such as security. Because of course these platforms are not perfect. Just like any other platform, these are, you need to understand what you're working with here. You need to understand the responsibilities. It's not just a competitor to real developers. It's something that you need to, as an organization, you need to think about what are the meaningful ways of working with this data. Here's quite a recent example as well from August actually, where due to basically a way that Power Apps was configuring their OData feeds, Microsoft Power Apps, one of these low-code platforms, due to the way that these OData feeds were still presented as a fallback option for integration, there were actually a significant amount of data exposure. And unfortunately, even specifically, this was for healthcare. So for example, State of New York's new Power Apps, new low-code environments that they had built on to track the vaccination statuses, that data was unfortunately exposed. So, what can we do in this landscape of everything changing in terms of low-code environments, MLOps environments, all this new kind of stuff coming in? What can we do as developers? Well, I would argue that we need to go back to basics and talk about in identity and access management. We really need to refocus on understanding from on top of all of these environments that we are working with, how do we secure the access, our access, our customers or the clients, users access, and ultimately also when our environments are talking to between each other. This means in practice basically role-based access control, but also attribute-based access control for cloud resources. Attribute-based access control has been available in AWS for a while. It's coming now also in storage and some other services to the Azure world as well. So you can actually add conditions on top of these RBAC roles that you are granting with. As developers, we can continue to focus on removing credentials from code. We can focus on secure coding principles in there, not having any sort of account keys or shared keys or any sort of credentials in there. And we can definitely minimize the usage of any of these non-personal user credentials, such as service principals, whenever you can. And let me actually take a little bit of a sideline here and talk about these service principles. So basically, if you recall what Solorigate was, it was basically a nation-state level attack against U.S. government entities in order to try to affect the results of the election. Again, well, this time one of the attacks of the Solorigate was actually focusing on these existing non-personal users being in place. So in Azure, there were service principals that were granted for perfectly legitimate application registrations. So imagine if you had an SSO integration with a third-party application that requires the app registration. It has perfectly legitimate rights when it's created. It has potentially some sort of it has a set of credentials attached to it that then whoever gets those credentials can actually can then reuse those credentials with the same permissions that the application was in. So if the application was, let's say, Salesforce or something similar, the application could get access to actually list all of the users in the directory, maybe even write back some sort of data. So it's quite powerful way of persisting the access in an environment during an attack. And even worse, before or when the Solorigate was happening, a lot of organizations didn't have good lifecycle management for the service principles. So that means that you didn't rotate the keys. You maybe only had one set of credentials that never expired there. And if one of those credentials was then successfully leaked, that meant that the attacker also had a never-ending access using your service principal level of access. And they could actually go in and create their own credentials as well, and basically hide under the disguise of your legitimate applications. So now, for new service principals, there is, I believe, a 3-month key period of their maximum, and by default, I believe that's even 2 weeks right now. So we are getting better and better in there. Okay, let's come back from this sidetrack and let's go through this list until the end of this list. And the last part here is really API security. So basically, API security is getting more and more important when we are asked as developers to expose these results of these MLOps environments as usable pieces of the puzzle for our low-code environments. How do I connect these Power Apps into my amazing machine learning on top of my secret data? It's through an API. It's always through an API. And that means that we again need to focus on securing access and authorization to those APIs. This means that when you are designing APIs, you need to think about always what is the minimum amount of exposure that you are giving out. Are you building these kind of very forward-looking queries available in your APIs, or are you limiting them to kind of single-purpose queries as well? This is actually that important that OWASP actually released a draft actually or a new version of the top 10 list actually only for API security. I do recommend you to check that one out because it does give you very good secure coding principles. And even if you only look at the OWASP top 10 list to secure your applications, if you looked only on that so far, that's great, but just repeat that same pattern that you do for your API security top 10 list, and you'll already be very well off compared to everyone else around you, unfortunately. That's a good start. It's not where it's going to end, but that's a good start there. All right, and that gets us to the end of the session. There's a quick reminder to check out the book if you want to harden your Azure against misconfigurations, if you want to learn more about the shared responsibilities across all of these. Go check out my book. It's available through different institutional subscriptions as well. So if you have access to like O'Reilly Safari, or if you have access to through libraries, all of these could be available to you. Or of course, my publisher likes it if you actually get your hands on the physical book as well. And I also have a related LinkedIn learning course that I'm an instructor for, and anyone can get this for free. So just send me a message in Discord or send me a message, connect me on LinkedIn, refer to this session, and I will send you a LinkedIn learning course for free. There's a time box for 24 hours, but it's a 1-hour course. So based on my math capabilities, you should be able to finish that course during that time frame. And with that, I am ready to see if we have any questions coming in.
We have not had any raised at this moment. Just a couple of things if people need a moment to think about any questions they want to ask. For those who are watching here today and are in the Discord server, if you could be so kind as to fill out a session feedback form, you can find the link to that in the announcements channel at the top, but I will just post it again in the in the channel for this particular chat. It's the Microsoft Forms link. Secondly, if there's a prize draw for some tickets to NDC, no particular NDC, you can choose which one you want if you win. All we need is the number associated, I believe, with the ticket for this event. As you can see there, for example, Tom has done there in the chat. So if anybody wants to post those, we can get you entered into the prize draw for that. And yeah, if you could fill out the feedback forms, those would be fantastic.
Awesome. While people are filling in the form or thinking of the questions, NDC is happening in January, right?
I believe so, but don't hold me to that one.
If it's I'm assuming it's NDC London because it will make sense.
I suspect
that's in January, indeed.
I think that the ticket is for whichever NDC event you want to go to. However, I believe that travel and such is still on you. So if you want a ticket to the event in Sydney, for example, that's fine, but you have to find out how you get there. I think it's so that people who are attending internationally can go to events that are closer to them rather than saying, oh, specifically it's a ticket for London.
That sounds like a loophole worth checking indeed. Awesome. And there was a question from AC.
Yeah.
So basically, they're asking what are the most common Azure security snafus and fails? What I have seen. Well, I'm glad you asked. You can check the recording of my session at last year's DDD, where I gave my talk, top Azure fails and how to fix them. I've given a similarly titled session actually a couple of times, or actually evolving that over time. So if you check out different links through YouTube, you should be able to see that. Basically, the core ideas are always there. That public endpoints are one way or another being exposed. Monitoring and logging is completely missing, and that's very unfortunate that in Azure, for example, you don't even have, maybe even for Key Vault or Web Application Firewall by default, there are no audit logs available. So that's a snafu indeed, something to fix. And then of course the usage of the default RBAC roles. So I see a lot of places where the roles are just used too widely and too broadly as well. So either using too widely authorized roles like contributor when you should use something else, or using a subscription level, the proper role but in a subscription level, and that goes a little bit too far there. And this is actually a good reason for me to quickly plug my blog as well. I've listed some of those Azure kind of common Azure failures or misconfigurations here in kind of blog post format as well. Excellent question, love that.
Right, well, if there are no other questions, how about if you're a speaker? Okay, that's not a question related to the thing. Okay, I'll sort that in a moment for you, Kev. Right, if there are no other specific questions for Karl, thank you very much for your presentation. It was really excellent. I think we're going to move over to the voice channel in the Discord server now. If people want to come and ask anything else or speak or such. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. It's been excellent again. Thank you very much, Karl. And Kev, I'll find that out for you in a moment about the ticket entry.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much, guys.